Right now, beneath the frozen surface of the most dangerous glacier on Earth, something has gone catastrophically wrong. Satellite data streaming into research stations, from Greenland to NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, has confirmed what scientists feared, but never expected to see this soon. The Thwaites Glacier is accelerating toward collapse at a rate 50 years ahead of every model, every projection, every warning ever issued. The ice shelf holding back enough water to raise global sea levels by 2 feet is fracturing. And the scientists watching it happen in real time are not just concerned. They are issuing emergency warnings they never planned to issue in their lifetimes. Most people have never heard of Thwaites. It does not appear on the news the way hurricanes do. It does not make headlines the way earthquakes do. But inside every major climate research institution on the planet, Thwaites has one nickname that scientists use without irony: the Doomsday Glacier. And that name exists for a single, terrifying reason. Thwaites is not just a glacier. It is a cork. A massive, ancient plug of ice roughly the size of Florida, sitting at the edge of West Antarctica, holding back the entire West Antarctic ice sheet behind it. Remove the cork, and what follows is not a slow, manageable rise in sea levels. What follows is a cascade. The ice behind Thwaites, trillions of tons of it, begins sliding into the Southern Ocean, with nothing left to stop it. Scientists estimate the full collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet could raise global sea levels by 10 feet or more. Not in 1,000 years. In a timeline that is now being measured in decades. The numbers coming out of monitoring stations are rewriting every prediction scientists thought they understood. Ice flow velocity measurements from sensors buried inside the glacier show Thwaites moving toward the ocean at speeds that have increased by 40% in the last decade alone. Basal melt rates, the speed at which the underside of the glacier is dissolving where ice meets ocean water, have reached levels that exceed worst-case projections published as recently as 5 years ago. Satellite radar imaging from the European Space Agency reveals a fracture network expanding beneath the ice shelf in a pattern researchers are calling the Ladder of Doom. Parallel cracks running perpendicular to the direction of ice flow are systematically undermining the structural integrity of the shelf from the inside out. Dr. Erin Pettit, a glaciologist at Oregon State University, reviewed the fracture imagery and described what she saw as a shattered windshield. The surface still looks intact from a distance, but the internal structure is already broken. She warned that in 2 to 5 years, the eastern ice shelf could be gone entirely. That timeline was supposed to be decades away. The models said 50 years. The ice is not reading the models. Beneath Thwaites, invisible to anyone standing on the surface, a slow-motion assassination is underway. Warm water, specifically a mass of deep ocean current called circumpolar deep water, has found a pathway beneath the glacier's base. This water runs 2 degrees Celsius above the freezing point of ice. That sounds small. It is not small. 2 degrees is enough to carve enormous underwater cavities into the glacier's foundation at rates of up to 2 meters per year. Scientists drilling into the glacier floor discovered a void the size of a large city had formed at the base of Thwaites between 1992 and 2019. A cavity so large that 14 billion tons of ice had already melted away from the inside before anyone on the surface knew it was there. The glacier is being hollowed out from below, while satellites photograph the surface above. The warm water intrusion is not a temporary condition. It is structural. Ocean circulation patterns have shifted in ways that are delivering this deep warm current directly into the grounding zone, the point where the glacier's base detaches from the bedrock below and begins floating on ocean water. Once that grounding line retreats far enough inland, the process becomes self-sustaining. The ice does not need additional warming to keep collapsing. Gravity takes over. Gravity does not reverse. Picture the streets of Miami underwater, not flooded from a storm, not temporarily swamped by a hurricane surge that drains away in days. Permanently, structurally underwater, swallowed by an ocean that has risen and will not fall back. A 2-foot sea level rise, the minimum projection if Thwaites alone collapses, pushes storm surge events that currently happen once every 100 years into events that happen every single year. Miami, New Orleans, New York City, Boston, Houston, Galveston, Charleston, and Norfolk all face permanent flooding of critical infrastructure at that level. The populations at risk globally exceed 600 million people living in low-elevation coastal zones. Bangladesh loses 17% of its land. The Netherlands faces inundation of areas that house 1/3 of its population. Jakarta, already sinking, accelerates toward complete submersion. The island nations of the Pacific and Indian Ocean do not adapt. They disappear. These are not projections for a distant century. These are the outcomes attached to a glacier that is already collapsing 50 years ahead of schedule. The families living in those cities are not being told. Evacuation planning does not exist. The coastal infrastructure being built today is being permitted and financed as though Thwaites is stable. It is not stable. It has not been stable for years. The scientific community has been sounding alarms about Thwaites for over a decade. The response from governments, insurance markets, and financial institutions has been almost complete silence. The International Thwaites Glacier Collaboration, a joint British and American research program, represents the most ambitious field study ever attempted on a single glacier. It deployed researchers to one of the most hostile environments on Earth to drill, sample, and measure a system that is actively trying to kill everyone who approaches it. The findings from that program are now public. The conclusions are unambiguous, and the policy response has been effectively zero. Insurance markets are beginning to move. Coastal property underwriting in South Florida is tightening at rates that suggest the industry already knows what the public has not been told. Lloyd's of London has quietly reclassified long-term coastal risk assessments in ways that make new infrastructure financing increasingly difficult to obtain. Federal flood insurance programs are projecting insolvency within 20 years under current sea level rise trajectories. The money is starting to price in the collapse. The politics have not caught up. Emergency preparedness budgets for sea level rise adaptation remain a fraction of what climate scientists say is necessary. The gap between what researchers are measuring in Antarctica and what city planners are building for on American coastlines is not a gap anymore. It is a chasm. The most uncomfortable question in glaciology right now is the one that the scientists studying Thwaites ask each other in private. Has the collapse already begun in a way that cannot be reversed? Marine ice sheet. Instability is not a theory. It is a documented physical process. Once a marine ice sheet, an ice sheet grounded below sea level like Thwaites, begins retreating past a certain threshold, the geometry of the bedrock beneath it creates a feedback loop. As the grounding line retreats inland, it encounters deeper bedrock. Deeper bedrock means thicker ice. Thicker ice drives faster flow. Faster flow accelerates retreat. The process feeds itself without any additional forcing from the atmosphere or the ocean. No amount of emissions reduction stops it once it begins, and at that point the retreat can become irreversible. Some researchers who have spent their careers studying this specific mechanism now believe Thwaites may have already crossed that line. Not might have, may have. The data showing grounding line retreat of roughly 14 kilometers over the last decade is consistent with the early stages of irreversible collapse. Dr. Robert DeCanto at the University of Massachusetts reviewed the most recent grounding line data and said the trajectory looks like what our worst-case models predicted. Except it is happening now, not in 2070. The glacier does not negotiate. It does not wait for summits, or pledges, or infrastructure bills, or the next election cycle. It does not pause while governments calculate political advantage, or while insurance companies update their actuarial tables. Thwaites has been building toward this moment for decades, quietly, invisibly, in the dark beneath the Southern Ocean, grinding toward the sea one irreversible meter at a time. The satellites overhead photograph it every day. The sensors buried in its base transmit data around the clock. The researchers who have given years of their lives to understanding it are now watching their most alarming projections become present tense reality. 600 million people live on coastlines that will not look the same inside a single human lifetime. The cities those people call home were built on the assumption that the ice would hold. That assumption is now in question in ways that no press conference has fully explained, and no government has fully prepared for. Beneath the surface of the coldest place on Earth, the cork is loosening. The water behind it has been waiting for 10,000 years, and the sound the glacier makes as it fractures, deep and slow and unstoppable, is getting louder